Houston SPCA Pet Pawcast. I'm Dr. Virginia DeChant, and today we're going to be talking about basic horse care. I also want to mention Jazzy. She is a wonderful chestnut saddlebred mare. She's about 18 years old. She came to us through a cruelty case. We've gotten her all taken care of, and she's back up in full weight, ready to go to her new home.
How do you establish a good feeding routine for a horse?
So most horses need to have a diet that's based on forage. By forage, I mean either grass or hay. And that should be the most important part of their diet. Horses will eat anywhere from 2 to 3% of their body weight in hay each day. So for an average 1,000-pound horse, that's 20 to 30 pounds of hay a day, and or pasture. And a typical square bale weighs about 40 to 45 pounds, so they'll eat about 2/3 of a bale of hay each day.
How do you recognize signs of malnutrition or obesity in a horse?
So when we're looking at horses to determine what their perfect body weight is, it's important that we actually touch them with our hands instead of just looking at a picture of them. So what we do is we use a scale called the Henneke Body Condition Score, and it goes from 1, which is emaciated, to 9, which is obese, and we want our horses to be at a 5. So I'll feel many different parts of their body and determine if there's enough muscle there, if there's enough fat there, and I'll kind of feel how much of their skeleton is easily on the outside, and from there figure out whether they're on this end or that end.
Let's say a horse is malnourished. What would be the ways to feed them into a healthy weight?
So when we get emaciated horses here at the Houston SPCA, we generally start off on a forage-only diet. So when they first arrive here, we'll give them small amounts of a specific type of hay called alfalfa. It's very high in nutrients and it's very easily digested. So we'll start them on the alfalfa hay, and if they're doing well, then we incorporate a feed. And our feed is really nice. It is pre-cooked, so it's super digestible. And it's not only the grains, but it also has forage built into it. So we can feed more of it and not have to worry about some of the diseases we worry about if we get their blood sugar too high.
And what about when a horse is obese? What would be the feeding routine for them?
For feeding an obese horse, it's pretty simple. It's hay only. They do have some, it's called either ration balancer or easy keeper food, and you just feed a little tiny cup of it, and that will have all of their trace minerals and electrolytes and stuff in it. So it kind of helps if everybody else in the barn is getting fed. Even the fat horse can get a little scoop of his super nutritious pellets.
How much space does a horse need to live comfortably?
The recommendation for bare minimum is 1 acre of pasture for every horse. You can sometimes get away with a little less if your horse is very well managed and being exercised and has opportunities to go out and play with other horses.
What would you say are the daily care responsibilities for a horse owner?
The daily care of a horse basically involves going out there twice a day at least, making sure that they have nice, fresh, clean water to drink, making sure they have hay or grass to eat, and then if they need grain, making sure they get their grain. And at least twice a day, you have to put your eyes on the horse and make sure you don't see anything wrong, that there's no lameness, no lumps, no cuts, and that the horse is acting normally.
How do you prevent colic in horses related to diet?
So the key to preventing colic, there's no magic cure-all. But there are things that we can do to reduce the risk of colic. One of which is making sure that they always have plenty of forage in front of them, making sure we always feed them at the same time every day, and then not overdoing it with the grain.
Could you go into more detail of what colic is?
So colic is a general term. It just means pain in the belly. So anything that's in the belly can be painful and cause colic. In most horses, the colic, the belly pain, is related to their intestinal tract. The most common type of colic is where they have a little too much gas built up, and I once had a professor call it a fart caught crossways. And the gas builds up and it stretches the intestine. That makes it hurt, so the intestines don't squish as much. But unfortunately, that makes even more gas build up, and then it really stops squishing. So in a lot of times in colic, if we can take away the pain and get those intestines to start moving again, the horse does all right.
What would you say are the signs and symptoms of colic?
The symptoms that a horse shows with colic kind of vary as far as how intense their pain is. If their pain is really sharp and intense, they will do things like throw themselves to the ground or roll violently. If the pain is less intense, sometimes they'll paw, sometimes they'll just lay down and get back up and lay down and get back up. And then there's some horses that they're pretty pain tolerant, and when they're colicking, they'll just kind of stand there and be in outer space. They'll just kind of zone out.
How does a horse's diet vary by age and breed?
So horses' diets change according to what they're doing, how old they are, and what does well for them. Some types of breeds, like quarter horses, they're very what we call easy keepers. It doesn't require a whole lot of calories for them to maintain their body weight. Other horses, such as race horses, they need lots of calories because they burn a lot of calories. Young growing horses need different types of nutrients. They need more protein because they're building bone, they're building muscle, they're growing. In fact, the horse that requires the most number of calories is a broodmare, especially if she is pregnant while she's making milk for the foal she's already had. Their calorie requirements can be up to 2.5 times what a normal horse requires.
They take up the most, or they require the most,
Yep.
even more than a racehorse?
A broodmare with a foal on her side requires more nutrition than a racehorse racing.
Wow. Moving into water and hydration, can horses drink too much water?
It's pretty rare that a horse will overdo it on the water. And if they do overdo it on the water, they just pee it all out.
What are the signs of dehydration in a horse?
So some of the signs of dehydration in a horse would be when you touch their gums, they'll be sticky instead of wet. And then if you pinch the skin on their neck and lift it up a little bit, it should slap right back down. When they're dehydrated, the pinch will stay and slowly go back down. If they're really dehydrated, their urine will turn a very dark color, and their eyes will sink back into their sockets.
During extreme temperatures like we have in Houston, what's a great way to ensure that horses stay hydrated?
One of the ways that we can encourage horses to drink is we'll put a little bit of salt in their food so that it makes them a little bit more thirsty. So the other ways we can do it is we'll offer 2 buckets of water. One will have a flavoring in it, like a electrolyte powder that tastes like apples, and then we'll have a plain bucket of water too. So if they like the flavor of the appley one, they drink it, and it's got a little bit of salt, So then it makes them drink more of the regular water.
Moving back to shelter and environment, what type of shelter is best for a horse in different climates?
So the shelter really depends on where you live. Here in Texas, our most important shelter need is shade. And it doesn't really matter to the horse whether the shade is in the form of a tree or a roof, but they definitely need a place where they can get out of the sun. During the hot parts of the year here, they need fans to help circulate the air, because as the air blows on them, it'll help their sweat evaporate, and that cools the horse down a lot. In really cold weather like we recently had, if they have a place to get out of the rain and get out of the wind, they can actually do fairly well. Horses that are very skinny or horses with not a lot of fur, sometimes in the cold weather we do have to put a blanket on them so that they can stay warmer.
How often should stalls be cleaned, and what would be the best method?
So if you are putting your horse in a stall, it has to be cleaned at least once a day. And that doesn't mean just picking out the poop. That means taking out the poop, digging up all the wet spots, drying the floor off, and then putting fresh bedding in.
What's the best fencing for a horse enclosure?
I haven't found a fence yet that a horse cannot hurt themselves on, but I have seen plenty of fences that horses hurt themselves much more on. Horses don't do well with barbed wire. They're not as smart about fencing as cattle are. So I've seen them get very torn up by barbed wire. They also don't do high tensile as well as cattle do. A lot of times they'll get themselves tangled in the high tensile wire, and it cuts right through them, just like when you cut a cake with dental floss. The safest type of fencing is going to be one that's well maintained, no matter what material it's made out of. I've seen beautiful, sturdy wood fencing be extremely dangerous to a horse because nobody has kept up with it. They've let the boards break. They've let the nails stick out. I personally, if I had to build my own fence, I love the plastic coated 3-strand tension wire. Because the plastic coating makes it so that the wire can't slice through the horse. And if the horse runs into that type of fence, they kind of just bounce back off of it.
Moving into grooming and hoof care, why is daily grooming important for a horse's health?
Daily grooming is very important to keep a horse's skin very healthy. Not only does it knock off the dirt, but it stimulates the good oils in the skin, and as those oils get moved out through the hair, it makes the hair a little bit more waterproof so that the rain doesn't bother the horse as much. And those oils actually have some antibacterial properties. So a horse that's well groomed and their coat is well maintained is less likely to get things like rain rot or scratches where a fungal infection invades the skin.
You mentioned rain rot. Can you explain what that is?
So rain rot is when horses are kept too wet on their back for a long time. Sometimes it happens from wet saddle pads. Sometimes it happens because there's been a lot of rain lately, and their back is just constantly wet. I've also seen really nasty rain rot where people have put blankets on horses and not changed them or taken them off frequently. And the skin underneath that blanket is really gross and it's mushy, and that way the bad bacteria and the bad fungi dig in there and they make these real thick, painful scabs.
What are the essential grooming tools every horse owner should have?
Typical grooming kit is going to have a rubber curry, and that's the one used in a circular motion, and that helps break up mud and lift the oils up to the coat. It's going to have a stiff brush, and that's one that you use to really knock off big clumps of mud. And then it'll have a soft brush, and that you use on the face and the legs, and after you've used the curry comb on the body, and that lays all the hair back down and basically helps distribute the oils. Your grooming kit needs to have a hoof pick.
Going in the hooves, how often should a horse's hooves be trimmed?
Horses, their growth slows down in the winter time. So in the winter, you might only have to trim a horse's feet every 8 weeks. But during the spring, summer, and fall, when they're really growing foot, they need to be trimmed every 6 weeks.
What are the purpose of horseshoes, and do all horses need them?
Not every horse needs horseshoes. A lot of it depends on what the horse is doing, where they're doing it, and what their foot was like to start with. So for horses that are working really hard, especially on sandy soils, that sand's gonna scrape away their hoof. So the shoe is there to protect the hoof from getting worn away. In certain types of work that horses are doing, the shoes actually help make the work easier for the horse. So if you have a reining horse and he's doing a lot of sliding stops, we put special shoes on their back feet so that their feet don't get stuck when they try to do those sliding stops. And then there are some horses that just have very poor hoof quality, kind of like people with brittle nails. And so putting a shoe on there helps preserve their hoof for longer.
Going into health and veterinary care, how often should a horse see a veterinarian for routine care?
Horses need to see a veterinarian at least once a year. It's better if you can do twice a year. So once a year, they're going to need dental care. Once a year, they're going to need a blood test called a Coggins test. And then they're also going to need vaccines. The vaccines should be given twice a year, but there are at least once a year. The ones we give in the other 6 months are the ones that are based on mosquito diseases.
What are some common illnesses or diseases in horses?
I would say some of the most common illnesses that horses have are colic, so belly pain. They're also very good at getting wounds and lumps and bumps. And then probably the next highest thing would be lameness. So basically limping or having pain in the foot or leg.
How do you check a horse's vital signs?
So I cheat and I use my stethoscope to take the horse's pulse. So I'll put my stethoscope on and listen to their heart, and then I'll count for a minute. If I don't have a stethoscope, I can feel their pulse and count it for a minute. And a horse's heart rate should be between 40 and 50. If it's getting up in the 60s, there's something going on. The other vital signs I'll take is I'll time how many breaths they take a minute, and that should be somewhere in the 12 to 20 range. It could be a little higher if it's really hot out or if the horse just got done working. And then the other thing that's really important for vital sign is their temperature. And we take their temperature the same way you take one in a baby, and it's not in their ear. It's that way. And a normal horse's temperature should be between 99 and 101.
Moving into exercise and training, how much exercise does a horse need daily?
The amount of exercise a horse needs is very dependent on their age and the stage of their life. So, for instance, a very, very elderly horse, he needs a little bit of gentle exercise, and he needs the freedom to decide how much exercise he does or does not want to do. Whereas if you've got a young, healthy horse that's got a lot of energy, if you don't let that horse exercise, he's going to get that energy out in some destructive way. So I would say for most horses, they need at least 4 hours of turnout time where they can choose how much activity they want to do. And then if they can't be turned out and they have to be in a stall, They have to have at least half an hour of a good workout once a day. And there's many ways you can do that. You can just lead them around with the lead rope. You can get on them and ride them for that half hour. And then there's a thing called ponying, where you lead the horse, but you're leading it from another horse that you're riding. So that would be my bare minimum. And in an ideal world, I would love to see all horses being turned out all the time and only being brought up when they need to work and do their job.
What's the best way to introduce a horse to riding?
So the key to teaching a baby horse how to be ridden is you need to have somebody with you who's been through the process before, kind of knows what to expect, and can teach you ways to keep yourself safe and keep the baby horse safe. So training a horse to ride is something I would leave to somebody who's been through it many, many times, and an experienced person. I would not do it as a first-time horse owner.
What are the best ways to socialize a horse with other animals?
So some of the keys for socializing horse with other animals is to not force an introduction. So you don't just lead the horse right up to the pig and say, here's your new friend. So that's going to scare the horse, and it's probably going to scare the pig. So I like them to have the opportunity to see them from a distance in a situation where they can either choose to approach or choose to retreat. So if I want to introduce a horse to a pig, what I might do is put the horse in a pasture and then move the pig to a little pen where the horse can see the pig, but has the room to move away from the pig if they want. If they're not forced to do it, usually their natural curiosity takes over, and they come over and after they go, oh, it's a pig, they'll come over and be like, well, maybe it's not that bad. So if you give the horse the chance to approach on its own and then watch it, that's a great way. The horse will tell you whether it's staying scared or getting curious.
What's a fun fact that most people don't know about horses?
Oh, a fun fact that they have an appendix, but it's called a cecum. And our appendix is about the size of our pinky. In a horse, it's 6 foot long. So
wow.
That's something that a lot of people don't know about horses. Thanks for tuning in to the Pet Pawcast. And again, I appreciate your support. And as Dr. DeChant from the Houston SPCA, have a great week. See you next week.